here we are, 18 or so months from the big reset, which was COVID. March 13th, Friday, March 13th of 2020, the world stopped as we know it. And many of us thought it was going to be a pause, right? So as I was sitting at home thinking 14 days, 21 days, you remember back then, everyone was, oh, we shut the country down for 21, 30 days, everything's going to go back to normal. It was a pause. That's what we thought. Well, as the months went on, it became clear to me that we had a reset moment. Everything was going to start over. This wasn't going to be hit the pause button and hit it and then we'd start up where we were left off. Things were going to be different forever, and especially with respect to work, workers, and the workplace. And so I began to write about the great reset. Like everything, we have to rethink the way employees are treated. We have to think about who are employees versus who are not employees. We got the gig economy. Everyone doesn't want to come work 9 to 5 in a traditional way, the way we've always done it. So it was really an opportunity to rethink all things work. The reset moment is now.
Hello, Johnny. Welcome to the conversation.
So good to be here. Thank you all. Thank you for having me.
I met you a month ago, I think, in your office, and you gifted me a copy of your book. I must tell you, it's an extremely compelling read. It also breaks a lot of myths and notions that we all grow up and live in our society. But I want to start first with, I think, an interesting story that I heard from you of your journey into the human resources arena. You have a mass communications degree. You're a legal profession trained person, and you are now at the intersection of so many things: the industry 4.0, future work, reskilling, influence government policies. Uh, uh, can you relate to our audience that journey from mass communications, law, and into human resources, and to where you are today?
Well, in short, I can't keep a job, right? Or, or I was a millennial before my time, right? But the idea is I went to law school as a young boy, 7 years old. I found this guy in my neighborhood who had become a lawyer, and I just was totally engrossed with who he had become and what he did, and I decided I wanted to be a lawyer. So fast forward 20 or so years later, I'm practicing law at what was then a company we all know called Blockbuster. Yes, there was once a Blockbuster Video. You had to leave your home to get your entertainment. And I got a call from the then head of HR and the CEO of the company saying, I know you're in the law department right now, but we have watched you navigate very carefully many of our cases, and you've resolved them, oftentimes without us going to court, oftentimes without people feeling like they were alienated. You have a gift for human resources. We'd like you to consider coming over to the HR role. The reason it really, I took the jump, and it really was one, because I was leaving a storied profession. You're a lawyer, and now you're going to go be, as my grandmother put it, a personnel guy. Who would go do that? Well, it was because in my legal practice, my labor and employment legal practice, especially at Blockbuster, there were so many times when I found myself cleaning up really bad HR. And I don't mean HR, the profession. I mean just how HR management, how we treated people. And I realized that if we really, looked to the HR profession and we could take those principles about how to treat employees respectfully, with dignity, how to manage their careers and help them manage their professional development, that in fact we could avoid. So fancy that, as opposed to, getting in the middle of a piece of litigation, a protracted fight with people. You could actually avoid those and actually do good and do good. And I know many of you are saying right now, you should have said do well. It was intentional, grammatically not correct. But the idea is I could do good and make people's lives better, and also do good in business and for the organizations from a profit standpoint. So that was my journey from lawyer to HR. And it was really about making sure that we used all of the skills that God has blessed me with to help improve people's lives, which would ultimately improve the organization's bottom line.
Thank you, Johnny. I want to let our audience know at this stage that they can actually comment on their live stream page, whether you're watching it on LinkedIn Live, Twitter, or Facebook pages, your comments would actually scroll up on the screen, and we do have 10 minutes in the end to take some audience Q&A. So please do keep those comments and questions coming in to Johnny C. Taylor Jr. I was actually thinking as I was setting up the show this morning, you could potentially have your own late night show, right? Reset with Johnny C. Taylor sounds phenomenal. So let me start with the. Actually, I have a comment. I do want to read out this comment first. Is Abhijit Baduri do good and make people's lives better? You know, he's obviously phrasing you, but I do want to call him out because the illustration that we had in the opening credits was his Johnny. So he articulated the three takeaways from your book.
Let me tell you, and it was beautiful. I want to thank you. And let me tell you, he's world renowned. If you all don't know him, you've got to go look at his work. He's phenomenal and does a lot of work with SHRM. I didn't know you were going to be here, so I'm so honored that you did this on behalf of this session with us. But he's been a huge supporter of SHRM and globally HR and people. So thank you.
Thank you, Johnny. Thank you, Abhijit. So let me play out some words for you, Johnny. Climate change, big tech, social media, gig work, flexibility, industry 4.0, right? New societal norms, leadership capabilities, deficit, delta. In all of these, I can imagine, I can visualize myself in a room, a fly on the wall, in a conversation between the CHRO and the CEO, and all these words play out in every conversation, and they're looking at each other and saying, where do we actually start this research journey?
Yeah.
And what would your advice to them be?
So it's, it was, you're right. It's dizzying for those of us who are in HR practice and for those of many of you who are people managers and people leaders. The landscape, people's relationship with work, the worker and the employer and the employee social contract has dramatically shifted as a result of the pandemic. And it was already shifting, but I mean, we saw serious sea change in the expectation of how this relationship would go going forward. And as a result, CEOs and CHROs, as you rightly point out, are sitting together saying, where do you start? I mean, every day there's something new that employees are either requesting or, in some instances, demanding. And if you want to, in a knowledge based economy, win this game, employers, companies, business leaders have all concluded we've got to be responsive to them. They are now our internal customer. You know how in business we used to say, listen to the customer. The customer is always right. Well, in some weird way, your internal customer, your employee, is always right. And they have all of these new demands, these new requests, these new ways to make themselves, feel like they belong and are included and can be ultimately beneficial to your organization. And so there's this thing going on. So what do I tell CEOs when they call me up and say, where do we go here? What do we say to CHROs? It starts with a serious and an intentional process of introspection where you get very clear on your culture. See, at its core, it's all going to come down to culture. And I want to say a couple of things, especially to the leaders who are listening right now. Number one, I'm not one who believes in good cultures or bad cultures. Let's start with that. Save for illegal, immoral, and unethical cultures. So I'm obviously those, I mean, that's table stakes, right? But other than that, what we have done historically is we've tried to figure out what company has the best culture and we want to be like them. Well, at the core of all of this is an acknowledgement that you are your own unique culture. Your organization and your leaders have to sit down and have a lot of clarity and honest conversations with yourselves about how you want your organization to operate, how you want things to operate, how you want people, who you want on your teams. And that takes a real process. Too often, we as leaders find ourselves looking for an aspirational culture. And when we recruit people, we recruit and tell them, oh my gosh, this is who we are. Unfortunately, sometimes the people come in and that's not quite what you sold them on. And now they're really upset. I jokingly say, imagine, you know, uh, interviewing, if you will, dating someone for months, for years, and all of a sudden you get married, and then the real person shows up. You feel like you've been duped, and there's anger, there's angst, there's frustration. Well, that's what's happening in the workplace because, let me get to my answer, is because leaders are not being clear about their unique cultures. They're too busy trying to be everything to everyone, and they're all over the place. And undoubtedly, what happens is people come into the organization and are disenchanted. And then you start hearing, these are the things I want from the organization. If you had been clear on the way in about who we are and what we stand for, being receptive to a world that is changing around you, but real clarity, you will solve most of these issues because that your sort of moral compass, your guiding light, your guiding principles will help your employees know who you are and what they can expect from you if in fact they are aligned and should and will be productive within your organization. So I got to tell you, starting with the place to start is, what's our culture? Who are we? Not what's the culture across the street, but who are we? When you get clarity around that, then you will have a far more effective job at recruiting, keeping, engaging your employees.
Thank you, Johnny. And it's a perfect segue to my next question. And after this question, we'll bring your first surprise guest on. So let
Can't
me
wait.
play out. So let me play out the next question to you. And I read this in your book, and you have some very strong, clear path for leaders to think on this. We talk about diversity, equity, inclusion. You talk about how equity is not equality, right?
Right.
We hear the words cancel culture, we hear the words woke culture, we hear left, right, and center. And in such a highly polarized society, one of the things that you clearly say is that what is actually causing us a lot of harm is the monolithic thinking, and how you want leaders to shy away from that. Could you explain your point of view on what monolithic thinking is and why it is so important to move away from that?
Well, the irony is that we talk about diversity. And by definition, diversity means different different, right? And that may mean different based upon your skin color, your gender, your national origin, your orientation, sexual orientation. It can also mean and should include, as one of the various 20 or 30 dimensions of diversity, diverse perspective and diverse thinkers. And what we've done is we've become so engaged on diversity from the standpoint of what I call civil rights diversity, gender, age, race, all that good stuff. And we've ignored that part of our strength, the good that comes out of an organization's diversity is that by having different opinions around the table, different lived experiences, you actually can solve for problems. You can innovate in a way that you would otherwise not be able to innovate because all of the people around the room are not looking at something the same way. So, as a result, what I found is that we have a temptation to, and it's a little bit human, by the way, this is what human beings do, is almost for safety's sake. And if you go all the way back, the people, anthropologists and others will tell you, psychologists, and we have a ton of IO psychologists on our team here at SHRM, and what they will tell you is that we naturally tend to gravitate toward people who we are more alike. And so we become very monolithic. And in some ways, it's that security that we needed to survive as a human population and as tribes, which is now working against us because in an increasingly diverse world, we can't see around the corner what the threats are because all of us are looking at the threats from the same perspective. And from a business standpoint, if you're not willing to think about, you become, and think about the differences and different angles in the room and different perspectives, you become Blockbuster. Yeah, I started my comments talking about Blockbuster. We were so convinced, right? We were making money. We were monolithically, all of us in the room said, we've got the best thing going. People want to go in and shop in our stores. We just need to do it faster, cheaper, etc. And meanwhile, we lost the game because we did not have people in the room who were willing to challenge, who were actually encouraged to bring a diverse perspective to the conversation so that we could actually get ahead of the next threat. And the next threat was a Netflix. I mean, that's
Yeah.
just a pure example. So,
Right.
this monolithic thinking is not good for societies, and it's definitely not good for business. So, the diversity message, the irony again, is we talk about diversity and then we do everything we can to make sure that everyone's thinking the same. And that is bad business.
That is very powerful. You did mention that SHRM has a lot of psychologists,
Yes.
right? Uh, can you think of one name for us?
Well, smart. I'm going to be safe, right? 'Cause very smart. No, what I love about the team that we have here and every one of the intern, our IO psychologists and psychiatrists even, is that a lot of what we intuit about human behavior is wrong. Right? There's the science there. And it's funny, the second I jokingly say, human beings are very much like a virus, right? They're these variants. And the second you think you figured them out, a variant takes off and
Yeah.
there's a new version of
Eh, eh,
that same person.
Yeah.
Seriously. And I hate to,
No, no, of
maybe
course. Of
maybe
course.
some of you,
Eh,
but you get the idea is that human beings, but there is a science here. And we at SHRM, and I'm glad you gave me the opportunity to talk about this. People think HR, anyone can do it. And what I will tell you is the best HR is literally based in very good social science. And we actually have to understand what motivates human beings, what demotivates them, how they respond to different situations, different stimuli. And that's where our psychologists are and our colleagues are so important in this work because this isn't just instinct. There's a lot more to this.
You know, I think I kind of set you up a little bit to introduce my next guest, who is going to come and ask you a question. Uh,
Uh-oh.
this gentleman, who you know very well, is Dr. Alexander Alonso.
Oh,
All right.
okay, you got me, you got me. Okay, Doc.
There he is, and I want to do a quick introduction to Dr. Alex. Dr. Alex is equally accomplished as anybody else, a well-known thought leader. What I really like about him, and I've interacted with him a couple of times, all of that knowledge and perspective is very underrated in his humility, and the way he passes it along. Dr. Alex, thank you so much for joining up, and welcome.
Thank you, Hari, and thank you, JT. It's great to be here with you today. I will share that while you were talking about breaking down barriers like similarity bias, I do love the similarity bias that you and I have, which is towards people from the 305, as we like to
Yes,
say,
yes, yes.
from the greater Miami area. Uh, so, including the 954. But
That's right.
anyhow, so Hari, it's a real pleasure to be here with you today, and Johnny, it's great to be here with you today. And I have a question for you that is something that has always come up whenever I hear or think about the reset, the great reset. And we've talked about this repeatedly, but it's the notion of the great mismatch or the great skills gap in terms of talent shortages. And what we see organizations encountering now more than ever, which is there's this great labor crunch. We have tons of talent out there, but it's a mismatch between the skills that that talent has and what is required by most organizations today. And we see that organizations, some are very quick to try new options, new ideas, new approaches, but some are a little bit more stagnant. They're fighting the reset, if you will, when it comes to talent acquisition. I guess the question I would ask you is, what would your advice be be for CEOs or CHROs when it comes to resetting and trying to minimize that gap between opportunity and talent availability?
Well, thanks, Doc. And let me tell you, for anyone who's listening, if you're enjoying Reset, let me tell you, it is largely based upon the research that Dr. Alonso and his team have worked on for years. I am so honored to have had him as a supporter on this project, and I mean a big supporter of this project. There'd be no reset without Dr. Alonso. And you're right, he's modest. He won't say it, but I got to tell you, this is Sherm's book, and he was a huge part of it. He and his team. So thank you for running our knowledge department, and overall, he serves as our chief knowledge officer, and it makes me seem smarter than I am. But now to the question, and I genuinely mean that. Um, so here's the deal. We have, even in HR, guys, we are a little bit of, we're products of our success. And we have gotten caught up in, this is the way it was always done. This is the way it always occurred. And therefore, if we keep doing it, we're just going to get better at it. Well, we were already beginning to see shifts in the HR world from a talent acquisition standpoint. And it has to do with a number of factors, in the case of America, the American birth rate, but globally, we have some birth rate challenges. How people are educated in primary education, how differently, if you think about how we were all kind of educated, those, if you're a day over 30, there's a very different shift in the types of the modalities of education. And so how people are developing from a career standpoint. And then all of a sudden, Friday the 13th occurred, March 20th, March 13th, 2020. Everything we thought we knew was thrown out the window. I mean, everything when it comes to how people are educated. I was sharing this the other day with a NPR journalist, where if you just think about, we took the bachelor's degree as a proxy for smart. And you were super smart, by the way, if you had a bachelor's degree from a top 50 institution. And that's all we did. You could do the job and you would be given opportunities for that. Fast forward, and I mean, it was really fast forward. We're in a world where the smartest organizations have said, let's reset, rethink about this altogether. Do you need a college degree, a traditional college degree from um, for every one of these jobs? I will tell you, and Dr. Alonso will tell you, we had a situation here in our own shop where we were looking for a VP of sales, and it was classic. As opposed to focusing on what skills does the person need to have to be successful in the role, we were in our job descriptions excluding people because we were saying a bachelor's degree, this many years of experience, instead of challenging ourselves to say, let's really, really get clear about in that job description what success looks like. What are the characteristics, the skills that a person needs to be successful? And then you recruit against that. And even if you find someone who doesn't hit all 10 of your requirements or your strongly recommended attributes and characteristics, then we have to figure out what can we as employers do to help bring people along and get them ready for it. It is highly unusual. And Doc, you'll tell me if this resonates with you that you're going to find the perfect candidate. And if you're looking for that person, shame on you, because in this job market, good luck with that. What you've got to do is find people who are smart, who are agile, who are curious, and and are aligned with your culture. Couple that, and we can get them through and fill the skills gap to the extent there's a skills gap. But I just want to say this, Ben, and I would like this kind of flip this on Doc because he is the person who's brilliant in this area. Every one of us have got to acknowledge that there is a significant skills gap and that we don't have the luxury of ignoring that. So we need some long tail strategies, which include visiting the K through 12 education pipeline, because ultimately these are our employees of the future, right? It's not okay to say that's not our problem yet, because it is your problem if this K through 12 pipeline produces a talent that doesn't help you solve for your business needs, right? That's number one. And then in the short term, and you'll hear me talk about this a lot in the book, we've got to really challenge our own notions of what it means to be qualified. What is a skilled person? And we've got to be prepared to fish in some ponds that we haven't fished before. So I talk a lot in the book about untapped pools of talent, the formerly incarcerated, older workers. What do you know? This idea, everyone talks about going to coding camps in middle schools and high schools. Why not set up coding camps for 50-year-olds? who are ready for their encore career. What they did for 20 or 30 years is either that job doesn't exist or it's being offshored or AI is taking it over or whatever, machine learning. So, how about preparing this person for a new task? We as employers have an obligation to help solve for this skills gap. Doc?
You know, Johnny, what I would say is there's two principles that I've always abided by. And the first is perfection is the enemy of progress, right? Whether we like it or not, even when we're trying to fill roles, the hunt for perfection is part of what we run into that is a real issue. The other piece that I kind of want to challenge people on is being smart is not the same thing as having cognitive ability. And more often than
I
not,
told you he's smart, right?
more often than not, as employers, we focus on the proxies of achievement and cognitive ability to really drive as a proxy of smartness, right, or being intelligent. And in reality, what we want to think about is aptitude and what it means to be able to adapt to different situations and bring that intelligence to every situation that you work in.
Yeah, can I add to one of the things that we look at in terms of a characteristic here at SHRM, one of our guiding principles, is we want people who are smart and curious. And I just got to tell you, those two words are very different. They complement each other, but they're very different. All of us have met people who are really, really smart. If you've studied something long enough and you've become an expert at it, great. But if you're not curious, you won't be ultimately beneficial to the organization because much of what we know to be truth right now changes over time, right? It constantly morphs. So one of the things that I will tell you as a skill, and you talk about aptitude, is you need to look for people who are both smart and curious. And it takes both of those things in the going forward world, especially as skills change. I was meeting with and spent a lot of time over the last couple of years as a member of the American Workforce Policy Advisory Board, Jenny Rometty, who was then the CEO and chairperson of IBM. And she constantly talked about, she would remind us, she said, Johnny, 70-80% of the jobs that existed 5 years ago at IBM don't exist now. They just don't exist. And so as soon as we think we've solved for our skills problems, the games change, right? And now all of a sudden we've got to reskill. So this commitment to constantly, we used to say all the time, lifelong learning. Well, now this is the way of the world. Just think about it. The things that you learned not 30 years ago, not 10 years ago, but 5 years ago are likely outdated. So one of the skills that I think we've all got to invest in is making sure that people learn how to learn.
You know, the comment on the screen that you see is a gentleman called Brian Mattimore. He teaches innovation at Caltech Executive Education, and he added a third dimension, which is creative. But before I get you to respond, I want to bring on the next guest, Johnny. And this is a lady that you know. She's very prolific, and she's working on I believe, one of the most important aspects of building a society in addition to companies. Let me welcome on screen Sally Anderson.
Look at you. And here you are. This is your life, Johnny Taylor, right? These people are popping up everywhere. This is funny. So good to see you, my favorite Googler.
Oh, good to see you too, Johnny. And hey, Alex.
Hey there.
Thank you. Thank you, Sally. So before I switch over to Sally, so let me put it back to both of you in terms of the comment from Brian in terms of being creative, right? Because if you're creative enough, you will find solutions to some of the most complex problems that we have, whether it's the climate crisis or the inclusion debate. So any quick one-liners from both of you?
Yeah, quick one line on that one. And I'm going to steal some of Dr. Alonso's research. Increasingly, we've tried to figure out what are the three most important sort of skills or characteristics of talent in the future. It used to be speed and strength, for example, during the earlier hunter and gatherer era. Fast forward, there have been different definitions of what talent looks like. Right now, creativity, adaptability, and agility. Those three things are what the science, and this is what we're getting from our survey work when we talk to CEOs, are the three significant talent differentiators. Doc?
The only thing I'd add is meaningful creativity. And what I look for over and over again is curiosity with a cause and
Yes.
meaningful creativity, right? Those are the two things that I always try to drive when thinking about innovation in the workplace.
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Alex. Have a good rest of your day and a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
Sally, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much. So, Johnny, you know how much I care about DEI.
Yes.
Spending my core workday, I bring it up all the time at the board meetings. So I have a question for you in the DEI space. So there's been so much debate about inclusion and how
Yes.
companies are trying to balance so many interests inside and the pressures coming from the outside world and society. So how can we get past all the noise and the hype to help leaders understand the real purpose of inclusion in the workplace?
Oh gosh, that is, and thank you for the work that you're doing at Google to address this. You all are leaders. And let me say something. I know a lot of folks out there refer to DE and I. I've been in this work for a long time. So I remembered when it was just diversity. And then it became diversity and inclusion. And
Mhm.
then we've added the E in there. And I just read the other day there's a B for belonging and an A for access. So the acronym, is world is rolling out right now. But I'm going to tell you, just philosophically, we at SHRM like to focus. Listen, diversity is incredibly important, but inclusion is the holy grail. I think that because here's the deal. Any of us who want to achieve a more diverse workforce will not only can you do it, but it's going to become easier and easier because if you look at the American birth rate, for example, look at our demo right now, K through 12 public schools are majority minority. So diversity is a coming. I mean, that's going to happen no matter what. What we've got to do and acknowledge is that when you bring this real diverse population together, that this is not going to be easy to manage because people naturally, again, gravitate toward people who are like them. They naturally kind of think my way is the right way, and therefore everyone else's way is the wrong way. So, inclusion is trying to figure out how to take all of these diverse people and make sure that they feel like they belong, that they're heard, that they're respected, and that they are included. In short, that is what we are all focused on right now. Again, not to suggest that, and it's why we say inclusion, equity, and diversity, is because that's the holy grail. Now, to answer the question, what are we having to do as a profession? And more importantly, just as human beings, is we've got to first accept that diversity means diversity. And it doesn't mean diversity only when you agree with it. That's number one. And that's one of the biggest problems that we have. And so, even the person with the minority perspective in your organization, just like even the person who's the minority woman, African American, Indian in the room, their voice has to be heard and not minimized, if not, and not be ridiculed and positioned as, well, the majority says this. And that's difficult for all of us. That is a skill that we as companies have got to develop. It's an atrophied muscle, the willingness to accept that everyone needs to be included. I'm going to give you an example, and Sally, you live this every day. We focused a lot. A phrase that you hear a lot about a lot is safe spaces. And what I've seen happen, sadly, is what we really mean is there's safe spaces for some people. Like we have no interest in truly safety because safety and this concept of psychological safety, which is a phrase that people are talking about a lot right now, we've decided that some people are entitled to safety at work and others aren't. And that has created a ton of divisiveness and backlash, frankly, right now in the diversity work. We as organizations have to do better than this. We have to demand better. When we say we value diversity, it doesn't mean just diverse opinions that you agree with. It means diverse opinions. When we say we want to be more empathetic leaders, that means we have to be intentional about including others. It just doesn't happen naturally because naturally, as I said, we gravitate toward people who are like us and who have shared lived experiences and values and all of that good stuff. So that's the focus is inclusion, and it is hard. It is the hardest thing I've ever done. Let me just say this as I quite honest. I've never had a problem achieving diversity in the organizations that I've led. I've been a CEO for 13 years in for-profit space, in the nonprofit space. I can achieve diversity. What I've really struggled with is ensuring that all of those diverse people feel like they belong and that they're included, that they're heard and they're seen.
What is interesting is as companies scale up, Google is obviously a really large
Big
global,
scale.
right? A large organization. So the social attitudes towards diversity are vastly different from country to country. And now, in large part, under pressure because each of the governments tend to have an opinion on what that means as well. So I would be interested to know from Sally as to how do you balance this individual perspectives of cultures across the world with what the company wants to believe in should be the unique value proposition on diversity.
Mm. Yeah, thank you for asking. And I stay in touch with my global counterparts often. I was on the phone with Singapore last night. I'll be on with London a little bit later today, just to make sure we're lockstep of how we're thinking about our initiatives, especially to your point, Johnny, around inclusion. And I wanted to go back for a second and just say thank you for your answer, because it is about being seen and heard. That inclusion piece is so important. And that's all, it's what my team and I talk about a lot, how they're feeling and how the work we do internally and how Googlers are feeling. But to go back to your point around the global nature, some of it are the systems that we are a part of. And so if you think about even DEI data and how we can track things, we can track more in the US because of self-ID than we can in certain countries. So it makes it really hard to have some global initiatives that you can track consistently based on the systems and different regulations and laws when it comes to privacy. But I think of, and just from my personal perspective, companies need to understand that their employees are thinking about their values and how they think about their own diversity in places where they do feel safe. To your point, Johnny, about like what is a good place for them. Conversations I've had with a lot of employees is around the microaggressions they feel, having been out of the office, now going back to the office, even commuting on the subways. So it's a complex question, and I appreciate that you asked it. And I think this is what employers need to think about.
Can I
Appreciate
say
it.
this too? It's really important. You brought up the global nature of the workforce, and it really is something that doesn't get enough attention, and it creates a tension. By the way, a tension because oftentimes we Westerners think that our standard, our diversity value system is right for everyone, and there's this real tension, right? So what values are important in other parts of the world need to be reconciled with how we feel in the West and in the United States in particular. And the way that I tackle that, especially SHRM is 300,000 members in 165 countries, and we are absolutely and acutely aware of making sure that we respect the diversity that exists around the globe, and that we also are sensitive to that. It's just too tempting to say the US way is the right way and the rest of you all are sort of Cro-Magnon man. Like, it's ridiculous. And we have to be more mindful of bringing the full human race together and finding people where they are. Sally, I know you and I years ago had a conversation around, when you're engaging on a diversity, equity, and initiative and inclusion initiative, that you've got to appreciate and find people where they are, as opposed to just beating up on people, judging them for where they are on the continuum.
Thank you, Sally, for joining us. Folks, Sally Anderson, Workforce Diversity Director, Google. She's also on the board of SHRM and a prolific thinker when it comes to inclusion in the society. Thank you so much for your time, Sally.
Thank you for
Thank you,
having me.
Sally.
Great to
Thanks
see
for
you both.
coming.
And Johnny, we are now on the last segment pretty much. And I want to open up with a question, and we'll see some more comments coming in from the audience. You close the book by talking about metrics that matter to measure reset, right? So could you
Yes.
explain to us a little bit about how do we measure reset and its progress on various dimensions of an organization?
Yeah, so I could take you through all of them, but let me just say conceptually. We have, for example, always measured how long, I'm just using a few examples, in talent acquisition, time to fill. Well, while time to fill is a very important metric, especially if you're a hiring manager needing talent to get your stuff done, right? Get your work done. What we really need to start looking to is the quality of that hire. Are they culturally aligned? Did we retain them for periods of time? Did they ultimately add value? Was it truly additive to the organization and accretive, if you will, to the organization's financials in some ways, right? So it's taking what we will call 2.0, in metrics and taking them to the next level. Instead of just studying employee satisfaction, we need to look to employee engagement. Right? The next sort of reset says it's not enough to ask an employee, "Are you satisfied?" What we're really trying to measure is, are you engaged? Because we know the data tells us a more engaged employee is more productive and therefore better for business, right? So we're just taking a lot of these concepts, these metrics that we have historically, that have evolved over time, and taking them to the next level. Right? When we talk about diversity, we're not just talking about civil rights diversity. We're just not talking about gender and race. We're talking about all of the various dimensions of diversity. We need to measure that and then ultimately be able to dissect that information to draw down specifics to say, did it work? Because sometimes the diversity didn't yield the results. So we just have to, again, that's a whole chapter and I could talk at length about it. But the idea is take what we know to be solid metrics and then evolve them into a post-pandemic world. That's the mindset shift that's required.
And one of the challenges I've always had while working for organizations and when I consult and when I work with leaders is a lot of organizations try to do what they call as a business case for
Yes,
DEI. And I asked them saying, do you need a business case to have 3 meals a day? Right?
that's right.
So why are you trying to create a business case for something that is so obviously important to reflect the society that we work in? And I
Well,
wanted to know what your views on that would be.
let me tell you, you want to talk about something that has evolved, and I'm going to say this and it may offend somebody here and I'm sorry, but I've followed and worked in this space for a long time, first as a labor and employment lawyer and then as an HR practitioner, the diversity space. And one of the things that I can tell you, and thank God we've evolved past this point, is we really focused on our differences more than what we had in common. And as a result, no surprise, everyone is focused on their differences. And I think so we've gotten, surprisingly or not surprisingly to me, exactly what we should have expected. I think as we've evolved thinking around diversity, equity, and inclusion, even the focus of the new equity focus and the inclusion focus is an acknowledgement that much of what we did for 20 to 30 years didn't exactly work. It didn't yield the results. We as a country in the United States, I'm going to speak to specifically, are as diverse as we've ever been. And at once we're as divided as we've ever been. So it didn't quite work if that was our goal. So that's what you pointed out is absolutely right. When it comes to the issues of DE&I or IE&D, whatever you call it, what we've got to do is measure it differently. Think differently about it. And it's not just, celebrating a group once a month, having a dinner, serving food to represent a culture once a month. These are diversity initiatives and programs. We've got to culturally embed, this is the term, culturally embed diversity, equity, inclusion into just the way we do business. You should not, every business leader on this chat and in this podcast and this LinkedIn Live should be committed to diversity within their organization. And not just because they're supposed to do it, but because it's the way the business operates, a commitment.
Thank you. So we are now to the last couple of minutes. And before I do the closing thank yous to a couple of people, you close the book with the importance of curiosity as well.
Yes.
And as you and I know, we are working on how do we help curious leaders change the world on the
Yes.
partnership as well. But quick couple of minutes as a closing comments from you on why people should read the book and something on curiosity from your side.
Yes. So why you should read the book. The reset moment should not be wasted. Okay. The pandemic, someone said to me the other day, the pandemic wasn't all bad. And I think that's true, especially when it comes to workers, and the workplace. It's an opportunity for us to literally not have just paused the button, because with a pause, you push it and you restart where you left off. It's the opportunity to reset, rethink our entire idea, everything that we've developed, our ideas around work over the last 30 years. So that's what the book is about, is to challenge some of your thinking. Some of it will be uncomfortable to you. Some of it you may disagree with. But the very fact that you're willing to entertain it and visit it that way means we will make progress. That's number one. Curiosity. Like that, I grew up hearing that phrase, curiosity killed the cat. And I think we right? All of us, right? And I think that's the problem. We've totally underestimated the value of curiosity. Well, that is going to be the differentiation for organizations, for leaders going forward, is we have to be curious. Things are changing so quickly now that if you're not curious, you'll fall behind, you'll lose the game. And as an employee on a very individualized level, you will be unemployable. No matter how smart you are at this point and how degreed you are, credentialed you are, if you are not curious. It is a key part of success for an individual. And needless to say, I don't even have to say this, but as a business, if you're not curious about what's around the corner, you will lose the game. Staying the same means you're falling behind. The curious companies will innovate, they will create, they'll be more agile, and they will win the game. And that's what Reset is all about. It's really shifting one's mindset about how do we go forward post-pandemic.
Thank you so much, Johnny. And I do want to do a quick shout out to Achal Khanna, who is a CEO
Yes.
for SHRM in Asia, Middle East, and Africa. So she introduced both of us, and she's been instrumental in setting up a partnership with SHRM. So Achal, I know you're there. Thank you so much for
Thank
this
you.
introduction. I also do want to call out your team, Cara Brooks, Michelle Ward, Sarah Purell, and Brian Bell. They've been amazing in helping us set this event up, and Tracy Lynn Williams from our side to help on the social media. So
Thank you, Tracy.
I hope you enjoyed the conversation. More to come. Thank you so much, Johnny.
Be well. Thank you all. Happy holidays. So here we are, 18 or so months from the big reset, which was COVID. March 13th, Friday, March 13th of 2020, the world stopped as we know it. And many of us thought it was going to be a pause, right? So as I was sitting at home thinking 14 days, 21 days, you remember back then, we shut the country down for 21, 30 days, everything's going to go back to normal. It was a pause. That's what we thought. Well, as the months went on, it became clear to me that we had a reset moment. Everything was going to start over. This wasn't going to be hit the pause button and hit it and then we'd start up where we were left off. Things were going to be different forever, and especially with respect to work, workers, and the workplace. And so I began to write about the great reset. Like everything, we have to rethink the way employees are treated. We have to think about who are employees versus who are not employees. You know, we got the gig economy. Everyone doesn't want to come work 9 to 5 in a traditional way, the way we've always done it. So it was really an opportunity to rethink all things work. The reset moment is now.